those who fought in the Battle of Britain, it was a battle for survival. For the free world, it was a breathless moment in history. For failure would have plunged mankind into a new dark age. Never have so many owed so much to so few.
I presume that there is no one who will deny that England should fight on, even though the remainder of the continent of Europe is dominated by the Germans.
What's left of your army abandons weapons at Dunkirk. You're defenseless and just playing for time. Europe is ours. We can walk into Britain whenever we like.
Don't threaten or dictate to us until you're marching up Whitehall.
The war in France was over. The Battle of Britain was about to begin.
2 seconds, scramble! Take them up! Don't just stand there, get one up!
Faced with certain defeat, fighting against insuperable forces, a miracle was achieved by a courageous few.
Is everything up?
The lot, sir.
The German military machine, a formidable enemy of thousands of planes, a sure weapon of mass destruction against a small and undermanned force. Yet the story of the RAF in the Battle of Britain is the modern David and Goliath. Never has a motion picture captured the mood, the feelings, the terror. It's all there. The courage, the fears, the frustrations.
We've got the Rosencrantz.
He'll have to drink at the Red Lion there, won't he?
The people, the men and women who recreated vividly and realistically one of the great periods of our time.
We're fighting for survival. Losing. We need pilots. And a miracle.
Britain's finest hour, and the events and people who made it happen. This was the Battle of Britain. Why they did it is history. How they did it has become the miracle story of our time. Years in preparation and production, filmed where it happened. The skies once again screaming with bombers and fighters. One massive spectacle of a motion picture that attempts the impossible. And that achievement is the Battle of Britain.
They got my number 2 and the CO. You saw Canfield go down. It blew up. Just blew up.
This is only...
We chew the fat and give you our gut reactions on all things pop culture, film, TV and theatre. We talk the legends in the creative industry and those on the rise. We game old school. We do all of this, and a whole lot more. Like, subscribe, and get involved. Join Lance Dean, Anthony Nielsen, and the Outcast Creative.
Well, thank you for joining me on the 15th of September, the anniversary of the very height of the Battle of Britain. And that is why, some time ago, we decided to schedule a special episode of Chew the Fat, where we're going to get into the 1968 movie, The Battle of Britain, well, it was shot in 1968, was predominantly released in 1969. I've got some very special guests lined up for my panel tonight, including a couple of other people that will just be popping on for a brief period of time to talk about a personal connection they have to the film. First up, back from his Spartacus sabbatical, his History Bro. How are you,
Hello.
sir?
I'm very good, thank you, Lance. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you. Do you remember when and where you first saw this movie?
Oh God, I couldn't say. It was deep in my childhood. They used to put it on TV all the time, didn't they? It seemed like they did. You used to have Zulu was on all the time, Bridge Too Far was on all the time, Battle of Britain seemed to be on all the time. I feel like I watched it half a dozen times just on TV as a kid. I can't remember the first time I ever watched it, I must say. But again, it's one of those films, perhaps a bit like Zulu, where it's just sort of deeply ingrained into anyone of our age or a bit older, probably. There's no way you wouldn't have watched it a number of times off the telly.
Indeed. The first time I saw it definitely was on the television, but I was quite disengaged from it because it was all aeroplanes, and I was more interested in pew pew, kind of Where Eagles Dare type scenarios. And it was scheduled against something. It was back in those days because I think it was on ITV, if I remember rightly, because I seem to recall it had a lot of advert breaks, so it felt even longer than it was. And I think they scheduled it, BBC and ITV were always scheduling films across each other, so you'd have to choose which one to watch. And I seem to recall that it was across something I wanted to see. So the first time it was on, I only saw bits of it. But it's a much loved film of mine since. We'll get back into that. Also on the panel, I've got an expert in this period of history, Mr. Blippedy Blop. Not his real name, as far as we know.
No, my parents did love me.
Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for popping on, and thanks for offering to come on. I know this is an area of special interest of yours.
It's very much it's very much appreciated, Lance, that you've indulged to have this particular movie and what it represents, and on such an auspicious day as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I'm more than happy to oblige. Last but by no means least, now a friend of mine who I've directed in a few plays, worked with a couple of times, is going to pop in briefly and tell us about his father's involvement in this film, because his father flew some of the aircraft during the sequences. So actor Jonathan Hansler, or Jonathan Knackered Hansler, to use his name. Welcome to the stream, Johnny. Good to have you.
Hello, matey. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Hope you've recovered from the networking night in Ealing.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was good to see people, but I last for a little bit and go. That's just the way I am these days.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you. Well, look, I know you haven't got long, so why don't you just tell us briefly about your father's involvement on the film?
Well, I don't know too much about it. What I do know is Dad was involved with 7 films in the 60s. So it wasn't just the Battle of Britain, but he flew with John Jordan. Now, Johnny Jordan was one of the top cameramen at the time, and he worked on Battle of Britain. And Dad used to fly. I think this is right. My father's dead, unfortunately, so it's very difficult for me to know absolutely what went on. But I think he flew. The cameramen were in he would fly the bigger planes to get the cameraman in the sort of compartment. There's a compartment. The cameraman would shoot outside the plane to film it. It's really difficult for me to explain, but like if you can imagine a Lancaster or something like that would have had big doors. So Dad would have the cameraman on the doors, and they would shoot the planes in the sequences on the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, they used a number of innovative filming techniques for this film. One was that they had a specially constructed B-25 with much more.
That may have been. Well, he flew everything, Dad. He was a helicopter.
I mean, he may well have been on that, but it had very big bubbles, and it had 5. It was rigged with 5 cameras, where the
that
machine
wouldn't be surprised. That
normally
could
be
my father. That could have been my dad. Yeah.
Another thing that they did was they had a helicopter and they had a cameraman lowered on a rig from the helicopter.
Well, you know a lot more than I do. That could have been my dad because he flew copters. Dad flew everything. I mean, he knew he was he was. And in those days, there was a company called Film Flight, and Film and Flight were always responsible for all the movies that were being shot. You know, but they were paid very low and they were never credited, which I think is disgusting. To this day, my father is unknown. You know, and yet he was in 7 films. He's actually in a movie called The Mackenzie Break, which is the only film ever made about a German prisoners escaping from a Scottish prisoner of war camp. But
I have a copy of that on DVD.
Well, my father is the scene. There's a scene with Brian Keith in a helicopter. In a hurricane looking for the submarine at the end.
Yeah.
And my dad he speaks 5 minutes to Brian Keith in that scene.
Right.
So you know he's also in the Abominable Dr. Phoebes. He rotates the propellers of the plane with the rats, which Vincent Price is sort of one of his nasty things he's done.
Well, I think he did. Didn't your dad work on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Yes, Dad again. Johnny Jordan was one of his good friends. Johnny Jordan unfortunately died on Catch-22 when he leaned out too far and died. But he also lost a leg on what was it called? You Only Live Twice with Little Nelly. You know the
right. Yeah.
He lost his leg because he was filming too low. Half his ankle or something, and he died. He was very unlucky, poor guy. But his dad was very good friends with him, and there's a famous sequence which Dad isn't credited for, and to this day it annoys me. But there's a famous sequence, and it's the only time where they put a cameraman under a helicopter, and they did that on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And whenever the director said they wanted a good pilot, they'd say, "Give it to Peter. He takes all the dangerous stuff." So Dad would do all the dangerous stuff. He would always, fly with risk. My father, he would take on the tricky stuff. Yeah.
Well, good to hear that, Johnny. I take it you didn't get to go wandering along to the set. You would have only been a toddler.
I would have been tiny. No, I didn't. No.
Yeah.
I very didn't see my father very much in those days. It was he was working a lot on different things, and Puppet on a Chain, and I think my mother doesn't say it's. I think it could have been Shitty Shitty Bang Bang, but I'm not sure. But again, you'll never see my father's name ever anywhere, ever. You know, he's a.
But that's not uncommon for films shot at this time period.
No.
That a lot of people did go uncredited, and you'd have to fight to get your name on the. And of course, credits weren't as big back then, and they were often mainly at the front of films rather than at the end.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Well, we're going to get into the story of this, the making of it, the history, and all that. Johnny, you're welcome to hang around if you want, but you don't have to stay on for the whole thing. But
I might dash off, mate, because I've got quite a bit to do.
No problem.
You know my life, hectic as
indeed I do. Well, look, thanks for popping in and telling us that. And
no worries, man.
Great to give. It's good to give a nod to your dad, even though he's not around to hear it.
It really is. Yeah, it is.
All right. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, matey. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye. Okay, that's wonderful, Johnny Hansler. So, and I think actually on the a commentary, I think they mentioned Peter actually on the commentary on the 2-disc anniversary DVD, because I just listened to it today. So okay, so let's just let's get into the film. So the first time I watched it properly, as in sat down and watched it and took it in, was when I bought the DVD, which would have been the late 90s. I only ever caught bits of it when it was on TV. I never saw it on TV and watched it all the way through. Like I said, it clashed often with other things, and I would pick those things first. So History Bro, you also saw it on television. first time you watched it. Blippedy, when was the first time you saw it? Where did you see it?
So, like Bo, I remember watching it as a child on television, and I can't tell you what channel it was because I also seem to recall it was on frequently, and that really sort of kickstarted my interest in scouring the country for what was left of these incredible aircraft. But I can't tell you exactly when that started. I would hazard a guess around the age of 8 or 9, something like that. It really, what does stick in mind is that I seem to recall there was this obsession with Michael Caine at the time, and it really shows you the difference in how one views something as a kid and how one sees it as an adult. But Michael Caine seemed to have more screen time as a child than he actually did in reality.
Yeah, he was only available for a really short window. He was about to go to the States, but he really wanted to do the film, and he was a friend of Harry Saltzman, the main producer. So, according to the commentary, they were already shooting when he came on board, and they looked at the one part that they hadn't cast and said, "Yeah, we can schedule that." So all of his stuff was all shot in about a week.
Another thing I could say, just my personal experience of it a bit is, well, I mentioned A Bridge Too Far and Zulu. Of course, old Maurice Micklewhite's in both of those, isn't he? So he was on the telly a lot. It seemed to me, as Blippedy Blop says, when I was a child. So I was born and raised in the southeast of England. In fact, I grew up my whole life until I moved away for uni in Hornchurch. And there's a big aerodrome in Hornchurch.
Hornchurch gets a mention in the film. Actually,
it was a vitally important aerodrome.
Yeah, I think there's a line like they're down at Hornchurch or something. There's a line.
No, it got bombed a few times. It got like deliberately attacked and stuff. And aircraft scrambled out of Hornchurch were very, very important. But by the time I was old enough there was a park near me, Harrow Lodge Park, and then beyond that, beyond Upper Rainham Road, is the aerodrome. And it was all completely overgrown. It wasn't like a park. It was like no one really went there. I think there was some horse riding tracks through it, but you wouldn't really go there. It's completely and utterly feral and overgrown. And anyway, the other thing, if anyone's familiar with particularly the southeast of England, but all over the south of England, you'll find in country parks and odd places, you'll find these old derelict concrete pillboxes, right?
Yeah, I remember.
You see them.
Yeah.
And there's in country parks near me and over Hornchurch Aerodrome, there'd be these exactly that big old disused concrete pillboxes. And I remember when I was old enough to sort of ask, what is that? Well, I don't know, 9, 10 or 12, something like that. And being told, oh, that was when if Mr. Hitler was ever going to invade, they would have been used as defensive points. There would have been actual sort of battles, probably small battles, over these things. And so when you sort of at some point when you become aware of history and you become aware of everything around you, suddenly realize that like the film The Battle of Britain and these very real things I could see over the park, a pillbox, that it started to add up that it really was a genuine worry that we were going to get invaded. It could well have happened. It came closer. And of course, you see Dad's Army, another staple of my childhood, Dad's Army on the TV all the time. And so these pillboxes, for me, they're still there to this day, mostly. It would probably take quite a lot of time and energy and money to rip them down. So they're just left where they are. And it's funny, it's like an echo of a shadow of Hitler's ambition. Is still there in concrete and rebar form in country parks all over southeast England, and they're still there. And so I'm sure we will talk about later the actual likelihood of Operation Sea Lion coming off and us getting invaded and Panzer divisions rolling down Whitehall and stuff. I'm sure we'll talk all about that. But fact is, in the minds of at least some planners, it was a total possibility.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that about the pillboxes. They're still there.
Inside Man has rejoined us after some communication issues. Hello, sir.
Hello. Good evening, all. Evening, all. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Do you remember where you were when you first saw this movie?
Yeah, it was on TV actually, and I was probably about 12. and my cousin was really, very much into sort of. I mean, I was very much like yourself, Lance. I was very much into the sort of tank battles and and sort of Arnhem and D-Day and that kind of thing.
Kelly's Heroes.
Kelly's Heroes and the Dirty
Yeah.
Dozen, yeah.
Yeah.
But my cousin was very much into sort of naval warfare and air warfare, and it was him that actually had a copy of it that had been taped off the TV, and I went around there to watch it, and that was the first time I saw it. Yeah, it was on a clunky old. Wasn't actually a VHS either. It was a Betamax. It was a Sony Betamax. I think it was a C7 or C5 Betamax. Yeah, so that was the first time I saw it. And I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed it because I mean my cousin had said that. I mean, he was a few years older than me, and he'd said that. Told me all about where it was filmed and everything. And of course, North Weald is literally on my doorstep, and parts of this were filmed at North Weald Airfield, which coincidentally is where I think it was East Sector 11 group, I think, were based at North Weald. Hurricanes and Blenheims were based at North Weald, and they did use North Weald for the filming of it. Obviously, of course, Duxford as well.
Mostly Duxford, but a
Yeah,
couple of bits, couple of shots were done at North Weald by a second unit. Let me give an overview of the film quickly, and then we'll dive into some different aspects. So, directed by Guy Hamilton with a fantastic music score by Ron Goodwin, who did quite a few other war movies, including Zeppelin, which is another favourite of mine. Actually, got a great score. The aerial unit was handled by Bernie Williams. They had pilots from Spain, the UK, and a special unit called the Confederate Air Force, which were basically 4 Texan billionaires who all owned their own vintage World War II planes, and between them could fly absolutely anything. Now, the Spanish Air Force are largely responsible for the authentic look of the film because the Spanish Air Force loaned the production 50 Heinkel's, most of which were working. 50, yeah. But they had to shoot those scenes over Spain. They would only lend 2 of them to be taken to England. So when you get the shots of them coming over Dover and stuff, you'll see in the film there's only ever a couple when it's like shooting down. You can see the English coast. There's only a couple of German planes. When you do the reverses, you've got these big groupings of 12, 16, 18. That they couldn't get all 50 of them up in the air at one time, but I think they had about 40 for one sequence, and then they used plate shots to obviously create that. The film predominantly shot in Spain for 4 weeks, which doubled for northern France, largely England, a couple of days in France, really just to shoot the cliffs of Dover from France on a clear day. The main interiors and other talking dialogue scenes were all shot at Pinewood Film Studios, and then the exterior stuff for the airfields predominantly was shot at Duxford, along with a few other locations here and there. It starred an absolute plethora of British A-listers and character actors. You had the likes of Michael Caine and Trevor Howard, Harry Andrews, Kurt Jurgens, before he became a Bond villain, Ian McShane, Kenneth Moore, Laurence Olivier, Christopher Plummer, Michael Redgrave, Ralph Richardson, Robert Shaw, Patrick Wymark, Susanna York, to name but a few. There's even a really young Isla Blair in there. Barry Foster from the Wild Geese is in there. Edward Fox is in there. A very young James Cosmo is in there, and a few other familiar faces as well, like Carl Otto Alberti, who, of course, is the Tiger tank commander in the aforementioned Kelly's Heroes. The film had a budget of 13 million pounds. Sorry, 14 million pounds. It only made 13 million at the initial worldwide box office, but gradually went into profit over the years from other media sales, VHS, and so on. Michael Caine, as I said, was happy to play anything to be in the movie as long as his scenes could be shot before he jetted off to America. So his stuff was all shot in a week. There was a huge miniatures unit. A lot of remote controlled models were used predominantly for the sequences with the Stukas. They only had one working full size Stuka, so all the other stuff is model sequences. And then they had a number of replica models of Spitfires, Hurricanes, and so on for blowing up and all of that kind of stuff. So you had an actual aerial unit that would be filming, a miniatures unit that would be filming, a main unit that would be filming with the main actors, and also second unit action on the ground. So there could be 4 units shooting this movie at any one time. Some interesting things that were done that were unique for the film at the time was that they hired a load of barrage balloons. They attached microphones to said balloons and then had the Spitfires fly past those balloons to record the engines roaring past in the air to get that sequence, the sound effects correct. So it's going to quite a unique length. The Hitler speech scene was shot in Pinewood. That was all recreated in a studio in Pinewood with mat work used for the first time to replicate. They had one set of extras, about 100 people, and they shot them again and again and again and again in different parts of the set, and then replicated that using matte sequencing. And the guy that played Hitler was a Hitler impersonator, apparently in Germany at the time. How he got work, I've no idea. This was the 1960s. So, yeah, I mean, there's a few other things to talk about, but that's the blurb on the film. It was released in 1969, shot predominantly in 1968, debuted on TV, I think, around 1978, something like that. And we're still trying to remember between us if it was BBC or ITV, but I have distinct memories of it having a lot of commercials. So I think it was ITV. Yeah. So let's talk about the history a bit and versus the accuracy in the film. There's some sort of controversial views, but my take on it is as a sort of like Bridge Too Far, as a grandstanding overview of this gives you a sense of the battle, what was at stake, and the key linchpins. I think it does a pretty good job with that. Blippedy, do you want to chip in?
Yeah.
Give your views on that?
So I want to preface this by saying that prior to this film being made, there wasn't anything close, not even a smidge on the scale attempted in terms of the aerial sequences, etc. But much more than that, the idea was actually to document the Battle of Britain itself, which of course, spreads over many months, and that had never been attempted before. And a lot of what is lost on the general audience, especially as a child, is the lengths that were in place to get details that most people would miss. You mentioned a number of interesting things with regard to the Spanish Air Force. So I'd like to place it to the viewers that was specifically for the Luftwaffe element. That's only one half. It's jokingly stated that all the aircraft used in the film was counted as the 35th largest air force in the world, and
wow.
there is some elements of truth to it, in the sense of you had the largest collection of vintage aircraft that were flying at the time, because of course there was no possibility of anything like CGI or animation that could come anywhere close. And these sequences had to be coordinated with real aircraft. So in terms of the RAF aircraft, that had to be coordinated with the Royal Air Force. And there was a go-between, a chap called Hamish Mahdi, sorry, and he was a former Bomber Command pilot. A very interesting story of his service record in of itself. But because of his connections and how well respected he was within the RAF, he was able to be that go-between to get eventually. I'm condensing it enormously. The aircraft required, because many of the aircraft were not in a fit state at all. They had to be restored. And if you're particularly eager-eyed, you'll notice that there are many inconsistencies in terms of the marks used. But great effort was expended to try to get them as close to the Mark 1s that would have been used in the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, they had a lot of Mark 5s and
Mark 9s, Mark 16s. It's a smorgasbord of many marks of Spitfires, but where possible, they did try to get them nearer to how they would have been represented in Battle of Britain. The German aircraft, they're not German at all. They're all Spanish built, every single one of them. The BF-109s are all Hispano Buchons, and the Heinkels those are Spanish built, license built Casas. Now, there is a reason why they can only use 2. I think it was a total of 32, if I'm not mistaken. It may have been 50 in total originally, but the reason why they couldn't use that number, Lance, is because they were actually still being used.
Yeah, they were using them for training, weren't they?
They were still active aircraft in the Spanish Air Force.
Yeah.
So they literally went to the Spanish Air Force and said, "Do you mind if we borrow your bomber force, please?"
Yeah.
And what people may forget is at that time there were great tensions between Britain and Spain because of surprise, the whole Gibraltar situation.
Franco was still alive in '68, right?
He was.
Yeah.
And a lot of smoothing had to be done. I think one of the ways they were able to secure them, as well as the Buchons, is because they were all powered by Rolls-Royce Merlins. Rolls-Royce got involved and effectively told them, if you want spares, you better allow them to use these aircraft, which they relented.
Yeah, 17 Messerschmitts were made available for filming, which again, just you think of trying to get those kinds of numbers now, just wouldn't happen.
Do you know what, Lance? It makes me it scares me, my own ambition and megalomania, that if I was a director and found myself in control of 17 World War II era Messerschmitts and 32 Stukas, I might just try and invade Portugal, or Mallorca or Sardinia, install myself as king and tyrant of Sardinia.
I'm not sure how well.
Anyway, sorry, carry on.
That would go down. I feel you've revealed your plan to the public. But for anyone watching at home, don't sell Dr. Evil lots of vintage World War II aircraft. You never know what's going to happen with them. History Bro, where do you fall on this sort of scale of historical accuracy with the film, and do you feel it does the job?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, there are things you can point out and nitpick, or a bit more than nitpick. But of course, there are inconsistencies and stuff. But overall, it's very good. When we were doing the Band of Brothers and various other bits and bobs, I've made it clear that I'm one of those person that doesn't mind too much about the tiny details. That was the wrong insignia and things. I'm much more of a sort of a broader picture person. I'm interested. It's funny when you get history nerds. Some of them are really, really fascinated by the minutiae of things. I am much more interested in the broader picture, sort of grand strategy, sort of the broader sweeps of history.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, I think this film does very well. I mean, it doesn't crowbar in a completely fictional storyline or anything like that, right?
No.
And so it's very. I think the depiction of Dowding, so Hugh Dowding, who's played by Laurence Olivier, of course.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Lord Olivier, the Right Honourable Lord Olivier, First Baron Olivier. I think that was done very, very, very well. Stuffy, they used to call him, didn't they, in real life? That was his nickname.
And apparently the real guy and Laurence Olivier did bear a striking resemblance.
Yeah, I can see there's something there. Yeah.
And the story goes that he was on his last legs when the film went into production, but he was determined to live to be at the premiere. And
was he? Was he?
Yeah, he was.
Wow.
His personal secretary said that he suddenly got a new lease of life, and he came down to the set several times. Susanna York had to cart him around in his wheelchair and things.
Wow, incredible.
She dropped a book with all these photos that she was supposed to give him as a present, but she dropped it, and it got scattered halfway across Duxford Airfield.
Oh dear. Oh dear. But I think one of the things it captures very well is, well, obviously I wasn't alive, but what a lot of witnesses, people that lived through it, a lot of the accounts say is, the incredible sense of tension that, it sort of really did matter. Because there's one thing, when you look back at history, okay, you get the 10,000 foot view, you know what happened, basically, right? Now, that's good and bad. It's mainly good, right, to get a historical perspective on things. But it can be bad in a couple of ways. The main one really is that the fact that you know what happened, it's difficult to get a handle on, get a view of what people were thinking at the time. So, for example, you might think, oh, why did those idiots back in the Tudor times do this or that? Couldn't they have seen what was going to happen? And the same even with the summer of 1940. Like, people, in hindsight, is such a thing. People look back and say, well, even if Goering had got control of the skies, well, they were never going to be able to cross the Channel because of the Royal Navy. So the whole thing was, what was Mr. Hitler thinking? It was crazy. It was stupid. It was never going to happen. So this idea that Britain was in very, very real, immediate danger is not really all that true. But now, so you're suffering then from that 10,000 foot view of history, because at the time, in May, June, July, August, September 1940, it was a very, very real worry, because of course, if the Luftwaffe had got complete aerial superiority, then even though the German Navy was a fraction the size of the Royal Navy, if they had complete air superiority, then who knows what might have happened, right? You just look at the sheer numbers. Like, we had, again, in the Channel region around the home coast, we had like 5 battleships, like 50 destroyers, right? And the Germans had like no battleships and like 2 destroyers. Okay, they only had two really giant battleships, didn't they? The Bismarck and the Tirpitz, neither of which were in the Channel. But if they'd had complete air superiority, it would have to be pretty much complete, though. Maybe they could have opened the Channel for a day or two, because well, even by World War II, you realise that if you had no air cover, then the greatest navies in the world were sort of sitting ducks. Big 14-inch, 16-inch guns don't stand up to hundreds of fighters. They don't. The fighters will win. So it was of absolutely vital importance that fighter command didn't completely fold in that summer of 1940. And of course, FDR and the Americans are still very, very reticent. And old Joe Kennedy, they thought that it wasn't really worth fighting on in some senses, because it was a foregone conclusion. It was a fait accompli. Nobody had stopped it. And remember, Hitler had defeated France in 6 weeks flat. Right? He'd taken over Denmark in a day. He'd taken over the Balkans and Greece in like 3-4 weeks. Right? The Wehrmacht looked absolutely unstoppable. That's what it looked like in 1940. And there's no way that plucky old Royal Air Force would be able to stop, because we were outnumbered 4-1, something like that. There's a great line, isn't there, where Olivier's like, our young men have got to shoot down their young men at a rate of 4-1. Yeah, it doesn't look good. Doesn't look good for us. And so there's that thing of the sea line was never going to happen. Hitler had this small window before Barbarossa, and it was never actually all that likely. Well, go back to May 1940 and say that without knowing how it all went, right? So that's one of the things I wanted to point out to begin with, because I think a lot of people do, with that 10,000-foot view, they think we make more of it than we really do. But when you're a sort of an Englishman who's also a history fan, you've got to know all about this, right? You've got to know all about Cressy and Agincourt and Trafalgar and the Battle of Britain. I remember being, again, like 12, 13, 14, something like that, and realizing, oh, this was it really was a pivotal thing. I've got to sort of, I can't help myself but try and learn all about it. What happened and in what order, and what the planes were like, how much better a 109 was than a Hurricane, and how much better a Spitfire was, and their turn in circles, and all the numbers involved, and of course radar. We haven't even mentioned radar yet, but I could go on and on and on. I realized. Sorry, yeah, that's what they originally called it. Yeah. That's what they first called it. That's right. Yeah. Well, I realised I've been talking for a while, so I'll let someone else have a go.
No, that's all valid stuff, mate.
It's funny because there were so many. What I really admire about this film is that all of the tiny little points that are constantly hit upon without any massive exposition dump. So you don't constantly have this massive exposition to deal with. So just in bits of dialogue, you'll have pieces of very important pieces of information. Like that, don't fly straight in one direction. Always make sure that you're not flying directly at the enemy, and straight and level. And those kind of little bits as they're talking, as they're exchanging their radio messages, and also, of course, talking about the RDA, wrongly mentioned as radar. I think by one of the characters in there, it wasn't radar at that point; it was radio direction finder. But yeah, I just love the way that these little pieces of information are just kind of given to us, and we actually amass those pieces of information into one great big ball of exposition ourselves, rather than this constant big conversations about what are we going to do now. Well, if we do this and we do that and we do that and we do that, then X, Y, Z and bombs your uncle. It's not that sort of exposition. It's and it's really subtle.
A good example of that actually is the shot that I've got on screen right now. This is one of my favorite scenes. There's no dialogue in this scene, and it's the contrast between the dinner that these guys all had at the beginning when everyone was present. They were all really cheerful and sitting around and so on, and this character on the right who's loosely based on Adolf Galland, who was one of the German advisors on the picture. Galland lost both of his younger brothers in the Battle of Britain, and we're introduced to this guy's younger brother at the beginning, and we don't need to be told anything else other than there are empty seats at the table. That's all we need in this scene for it to be effective, and that they're all sitting around in this very, very somber state, but because they're air crews, and they're officers, they've still got their personal valet guy who's sort of like serving them and so on. It's a really surreal moment. The guy on the left in the white, he was an actual member of the Luftwaffe. He plays an extra in the film, so he was one of the German technical advisors. But yeah, you're right. The script for this is quite clever, really.
Economical, very, very economical. And every line is used to push the story, to explain the narrative of what actually happened.
Yeah, there's a huge sort of almost pre-title sequence, one of the longest ever committed to cinema. It's about 6 minutes long, when we're introduced to several characters fighting over in France. Christopher Plummer's character, Ian McShane, Robert Shaw. These are all sort of characters we're going to get to know later. And suddenly it comes on the radio, Sedan has fallen. The Germans are going to be here in 30 minutes. Don't just stand there, get one up, and they've all got to get out of there. And no sooner has some of them taken off, the German Air Force is there shooting up the place. We cut to Dunkirk. There's a shot of German forces arriving. Lots of British converted vehicles covered in German extras to disguise what they are, but it works. And you cut to the abandoned beaches. You've got the radio playing Winston Churchill's words, and then we kind of go into the opening title sequence, which is this bombastic German theme with all the Germans arriving with their various forces and things, and looking across the channel. It's really effective. It sets up everything at the beginning.
I remember once watching the film again when I was very young, and my mum pointing to Ian McShane and saying, "Do you know who that is?" I was like, "No." She's like, "That's Lovejoy." we watched Lovejoy. I was like, "No, it isn't." "Oh wait, is it? Wow. Okay, all right, it is Lovejoy." I couldn't believe my eyes. When you're a little kid, you don't really fully appreciate that people could be 30 years younger or something.
Yeah.
When you see a picture of your own parents when they were like 20 years old and you don't recognize them and stuff. But yeah, I mean, so the thing about the Battle of Britain is that, Dunkirk is a complete and utter catastrophe. It's an absolute failure. Of course, the mission to sort of rescue them, that is a remarkable and sort of wonderful thing. But strategically speaking, in terms of grand war strategy, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible, right? It's up there with Singapore. Not quite as bad as Singapore, perhaps, but it's terrible. It's a humiliation, right? So between Dunkirk and them calling it off in, what was it, like October, or certainly by winter, that whole window of time is just it is sort of a darkest hour. That's not an exaggeration. So yeah, again, I think the film does that well. And yeah, like old films from the 60s or the 70s and things, they as one of the commenters said, they give the audience credit for not being an idiot. Right? Yeah. They give the audience credit that they don't need really, really blatantly obvious exposition. They can just show you something and you get it. And this film does that very well many, many times.
Just going to read this out from Darth Plato. Messieurs and Madame, England stands alone, I believe is what that says.
I really have to interject in that one. That's something that bothers me no end.
Go on.
England stands alone. So England, of course, was an empire, and it had a tremendous pool of Commonwealth countries to call upon.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, what made it such a difficult opponent for the Germans. The idea that it was, it is very symbolic, don't get me wrong, and it certainly adds to that tension in terms of what that implies. But of course, England was not truly alone.
Can I add to that point a bit?
Yeah. I'm gonna chip in myself, but you go ahead.
Just to say, Blippedy Blop's absolutely right. I suppose instead of saying England, if you said the British Empire stands alone.
Yeah,
because there's plenty of Canadian. We had all sorts of pilots, didn't we? Free French, Czechs, Poles, some Americans, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, we weren't truly alone. However,
Keith Park was a Kiwi.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Good point. But what I think is interesting, because I'm half American. Okay, my father's an American, born and raised in America. He didn't come over to England until he was in his late 20s before he met my mother. Okay, so I'm half American. I've got loads and loads of uncles and cousins in America. And so there's this thing of the special relationship. Churchill himself was half American, of course, wasn't he? His mother was an American woman. And we have this idea that like the special relationship and that America's always got our back and we've got their back and da-da-da-da-da. The reality was that FDR left us hanging for that summer pretty badly, in my opinion. Pretty badly. Yeah. It's just like, let's see what's going to happen. Let's just wait. As I say, he did think that it was a fait accompli almost. And Churchill's begging him from as soon as Churchill becomes prime minister in May, May the 10th, from the first moment, he's begging him, like, you've got load of mothballed destroyers and stuff, send them over. And he's like, no. I mean, it was a little bit complicated because FDR was staring down the barrel of a presidential re-election, and he'd promised that they wouldn't get involved, and there was a very strong isolationist movement in America, and again, it's easy to have that 10,000-foot view and not take into account of what it was actually like at the time.
Sure,
but nonetheless, FDR left us hanging in the summer of 1940. I feel.
I mean, the one thing I would add is that even though we were an empire, in that period between May and September, it wasn't like, and we you know, anybody who had aeroplane knowledge, who was a pilot, a licensed pilot, or even an unlicensed pilot who was willing to sign up, they were there from all kinds of countries. We even had an Israeli pilot in the Battle of Britain. But what we didn't have until we had a bit of time was, if you look at the output of Spitfires and planes and things being built in the first few months of 1940, it's quite low. But by September, it's in full gear. They're replacing them really quickly. But that is all coming internally from our island nation of itself. It wasn't like we had massive supplies coming to the country from the empire until the America convoys kicked in, which wasn't till 41.
Absolutely. I mean, it was actually something that I was going to point out. Although technically, we weren't standing alone. But in terms of finances, material, equipment, we were very much alone. Munitions, we were low on munitions. We were low on all kinds of materials, and raw materials for manufacturing. Hence the fact that there were these drives to try and recycle various metals and everything. Railings were coming down, fences were coming down, all to be melted down for armaments.
There was a shortage of iron, wasn't there?
Yeah,
but anything scrap metal.
But I think you're absolutely right, Lance. The fact that we were, we did have the island nations, part of the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth parts of sort of attached to us. But we couldn't really rely on those for the kinds of assistance that we desperately needed, that we did get from the United States.
Yeah, that small window, which is the window that this film covers, really the only thing that was stopping the Germans landing on our shores were several hundred young men aged between 18 and 25, most of them around the age of 20. It's not unfair to say that. I think it's repeated in history many times. Never have so many owed so much to so few, and I do think that's very true. And but it's great that we've got this movie. I mean, I'd love to see a new big budget Battle of Britain film. I really would. Or what would be even better, like a 10-part miniseries done properly, not written by the people that wrote the latest. No, but because I think the generations at school now don't have any appreciation really of the sacrifices people made then, and it's only with films like this that you can put it on and force some 12-year-old to watch it without them having access to their phone for a couple of hours and saying, look, this is what these people did, this is what these people went through. And in that context, I think the film is pretty accurate. This, by the way, this aircraft hangar, which is destroyed in the background here, you can see it's all collapsed. They actually blew that up for real.
Yeah, that was such a travesty. Do you know how old that hangar was, Lance?
Yeah, and I just found out today that they technically didn't have permission to destroy that hangar. Technically, it wasn't signed off properly, and they blew it up. And Duxford were very, very unhappy. with them. I think they compensated the Duxford in other ways, but
that was a World War One hangar, everybody.
Yeah, there you go. World War One hangar blown up in the name of filmmaking. Yeah,
and they didn't have permission.
Apparently not. The guy actually said
people could be prosecuted for that.
The guy said in the commentary, "Yeah, I'm not sure we actually, that it was agreed that they could blow things up, explosions and stuff, but I don't think it was like actually signed off that they could destroy a building, and they did."
To be fair, lads, there was a lot of uncertainty with the site at the time. I think there were talks about converting the site to a prison or something like that at the time.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I think they were taking advantage of that uncertainty.
Yeah. There was probably a pervading thing in the air of, oh well, it might all be demolished soon anyway, so we can run riot, and they did to a degree. But the bombing of Duxford sequence is absolutely superb. I think it's kind of implied that it's doubling for Biggin Hill in the film, but it's also a bit appropriately vague which airfield it is. But it's supposed to be the major airfield in the southeast, which I think would have been Biggin Hill at that time. But I'm sure you guys would know. But yeah, very impressive sequence. But I was surprised to learn that. I thought naughty.
I can't remember. Is that the scene where a Spitfire taxiing is actually hit by a bomb?
That all happens in the same sequence.
So that actually happened in reality, and the pilot flying the Spitfire that was hit by a bomb was actually Al Beer, and he survived with very minor injuries, and was flying like 2 days later or something like that.
Somebody did actually die during the making of the movie, though. There was one of the pilots was killed. I'll try and find the detail on that, but yeah, again, I found that out today that somebody was actually killed. That their plane they couldn't pull out of a dive or something, and they were saying it's like the stuff that they were shooting at that time. Until Tora Tora happened, which didn't start filming until '69, so it would have been filming when this was released. No one had done such a massive sort of aviation with practical, real planes and practical effects since Howard Hughes did that big World War One movie. So it was it was and still is a groundbreaking piece of cinema.
One of the points I was going to make, or a couple of quick points while we're still talking about the history.
Yeah.
One, I find it very, very interesting, remarkable, really, that the bottleneck was pilots, not fuel, not planes, not airfields, but the pilots themselves. I mean, maybe it's not remarkable, but ever since I first learned that, and it's one of the first things you learn, isn't it, about the Battle of Britain? In fact, I think that's the thing that Laurence Olivier is talking about in that exact shot. He's saying doesn't matter about anything else. We need pilots. We haven't got enough pilots. But the other thing I think Lance or Blippedy Blop touched on earlier that I wanted to expand upon was this idea that, okay, it's 1940, right? The Wright brothers only went up in, what is it, 1903? So is that the first powered flight, 1903? So when you get, aerial war was still very primitive, even by the end. Well, it depends how you measure it and what you think is primitive. Even by the end of World War One, it's still very primitive, basically. The idea of having fast fighter planes, having dogfights, was still, it hadn't been done really before World War II. You've got, there's the classic examples of things that happened in the Spanish Civil War, the Condor Legion, and the bombing of Guernica and stuff. But there's a very, very good podcast by Dan Carlin called Logical Insanity, where he talks a lot about the planners and the big minds, military minds, all throughout the interwar period, are arguing over exactly how important the air war will be in the next war. And they look at Guernica and they say, oh, yeah, no, you can sort of relatively easily flatten a city. and infantry divisions can move into somewhere like Guernica that day, and it will be. So in other words, whoever's able to get air superiority is going to be a game changer. So they realise that, right? But then when the war comes around, they also realise that, oh, it's not. That's not what it's like. Like, we can't just bomb London, like the Nazis can't just bomb London loads, or we can't just bomb Berlin loads and they'll give in. It didn't make people give in. You know, look at Tokyo, what they did to Tokyo. They still didn't give in, right? So it didn't work like that. And you know, there's all sorts of things like people assumed that if and when we start saturation bombing whole cities full of civilians, that everyone's going to start using chemical weapons. That never happened, right? But both sides in the 30s assumed that would definitely happen. And then the minutiae of actual dogfighting, for example, they're sort of it's so new.
Yeah.
It's new. They're learning it as they go. The idea that whether we should have the fastest, most maneuverable aeroplanes, or we could have slightly heavier, more armored ones. What's going to be better? Should we have a fighter that's actually a bit big enough to have a tail gunner in it? And then that, if another fighter comes in behind us, that will negate that. A tail gunner will take out anyone trying to follow you. They realise that actually that doesn't really work, or hardly ever really works. It's just better to have a smaller, much more maneuverable single-seater thing. That's just better. But they didn't really realise all of these things until you've actually tried it out a bunch of times. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that they're trying it all for the first time, and no one really knows. Again, we're blinded by hindsight. Like the Nazis, Goering, they quite quickly realised we had some sort of what later gets called radar. They quite quickly realised we had some sort of technology which was giving us the drop on them. They didn't know exactly what, and it took them a while to figure out that these tall towers we had was something to do with that. They didn't realise how important it was. So even though they attacked radar towers a bit, they didn't completely annihilate them. And again, the grand strategy of it: should we take out their airfields? Should we try and take out and bomb the airstrips themselves? Or should we try and take out their power stations? Should we try and take out their oil refineries? Should we actually just go to them into the air and just take out the planes and pilots themselves? The best strategy they didn't know, right? And so, in the end, actually, for all sorts of political reasons, end up changing to, like, as I say, sort of strategic bombing of cities and things. So it's interesting. You can always look back in hindsight and say, oh, what a terrible mistake it was from the German point of view to stop bombing RAF fields and aerodromes. And if they'd only kept doing that, then they would have inevitably won the air war in 1940. Well, it's very, very easy to say in hindsight. Why didn't they, as soon as they realised that we had radar or something that was giving us the job, why didn't they do everything they could to destroy that capability of ours? Well, again, in hindsight, it's very easy to say.
Yeah.
But at the time,
can I jump in about the radar?
Yeah, please.
Please do.
Yeah. The Germans knew about radar before the war started. They'd carried out clandestine missions with the sister of the Hindenburg, the Graf Zeppelin, over the south coast of England. They knew about radar. The issue for them was they didn't know how effective it was. They actually assumed that the Chain-Hun system was actually very primitive, and that was to their disadvantage. But they were aware of it. You couldn't miss it. You could see those great big bloody towers stretching across the coast, and that's why you see later in the film, and I thought it was a very, very accurate portrayal. You see the Stukas attacking the larger towers, but the assumption that the Germans were not aware of the radar is not correct at all. They were fully aware. They had their own systems, and it's argued to this day as to their efficacy in comparison to the British counterparts, but they had assumed, because they couldn't pick up certain readings, that they were more primitive. and therefore they had gone with the approach of, well, this is going to be a cakewalk.
That's fair enough, and a very interesting point. I think maybe just to touch more minutiae to that there's a difference between sort of some people in Germany knowing it, or the high command, and it getting filtered down to the guys in the aeroplanes, because there's lots of accounts of surviving Luftwaffe pilots saying they essentially had no idea how the British were doing it. I was watching accounts from earlier today saying, they may have been aware that there was such a thing and that the British were using it, but they weren't necessarily aware of how effective it was. But the guys actually, like the 20, 25-year-olds in the aeroplanes were just aghast, that they kept getting intercepted sort of almost perfectly.
Yeah, it wasn't just because of the radar, though, because the radar was only effective seaward. Once inland, it was not effective at all, at least initially. And it's a very complex system, the dowding system that was in conjunction with this. But you brought up Goering before. Goering was, you see it touched a little bit on in the film. He was reviled by some of the better tacticians on his own side because of his he may have been a decent pilot in World War One. He was an awful tactician when it came to using aircraft, and he actually maintained very little interest in keeping up to date with the latest technologies and tactics, and it showed.
No, there are lots of examples of Goering making Hitler promises what his Luftwaffe could do, and it sort of not getting close. I mean, the Battle of Britain is one of them. But there are, I can think of at least 4 or 5 different sort of really key moments, some on the Eastern Front, where Goering would say to Hitler, "Oh, well, we can do this or that from the air," and what he was actually able to deliver wasn't close, right? It's not like it wasn't close. So, yeah, Goering's a weird dude in loads of ways. Yeah, he was like detached from reality in lots of different ways, I think. Well, I think
if I was German, I wouldn't have him as my pick as Reich commander.
No, not at all. He seemed to be sometimes vainglorious. Often gets used, the word vainglorious, but I think he was very conceited and arrogant. And as exactly as you say, Blippedy Blop, I think he didn't have a good handle on strategy and tactics. What was actually possible. Yeah, and that's the last thing you want in at the very, very top of strategy making, right? That's the absolute worst thing you can have, almost. Lance, you're on mute, mate.
Sorry, thank you. Let me give a shout out to this guy in this picture, because I always remember this line: "They got the Rosencran. They got the Rosencran." And then the woman's like, "That's the only pub he's not barred from." That's why he's so upset. Got the Rosencran, and I'll never forget that line. It's really fun.
Classic bit of London Cockney core blimey, governor.
Yeah, but it all works. It all feels very plausible. Before we move on to the cast and what an impressive cast it is, I'll mention a couple of other bits of history that I found out whilst reading this mighty tome that Blippedy Blop recommended. Oh my God, it's. I mean,
you're welcome.
It lists every plane that was shot down. You know, who was on board, whether the crew were hurt or unhurt, whether they bailed out or not, believed dead, whether the craft was destroyed, missing or damaged, day by day. And I particularly read accounts around September. One of the interesting things that's not covered in the movie that was happening at the high point of the Battle of Britain is why the Germans were coming over and bombing us and bombing London and attacking our airfields and stuff. We were actually launching sorties over to France, and we were bombing all their D-Day craft that were preparing to be launched in the harbours. So we were launching regular bombing raids on those harbours. There were 3 that took place before today's date. One on the 11th, one on the 12th, and one on the 13th of September, where British raids went over and bombed Boulogne and Calais. So that's quite interesting. I never knew that we were also, best form of defense is attack. I never knew that we were going after their staging areas and bombing them, whilst also defending Britain. When you think of how stretched our forces were, it's nothing short of incredible that we were also trying to do that. So that was one thing that I learned during my research for tonight. The other interesting little tidbit, this is quite a nice one, which I'm sure History Bro will love if you don't know it already, is that the first time that the George's Cross was ever awarded, because I think it was a new medal for World War II, very high up, kind of like a Medal of Valor for our American friends who are watching, was actually during the Battle of Britain. But it wasn't for feats in the air. It was when a bomb landed right next to St. Paul's, and it was still live, and two men, a sapper and a lieutenant, personally went and tackled it and diffused it and sort of, stopped the cathedral from being destroyed. So they were the first two recipients of the George's Cross, Lieutenant Robert Davies and sapper George Cameron Wiley, for defusing a bomb in St. Paul's Cathedral. So those are just some interesting historical tidbits.
That is interesting. Blippedy Blop seems to know loads and loads about it, so he might be able to correct me on this. But I believe only one Victoria Cross was given to a pilot for the Battle of Britain, which seems a bit mean, bit cheap to me.
It does a bit. It does, but you also have to factor in that the Bomber Command as well were operating at some time. I think only one was given at that time as well. It was very, very sparse. Unfortunately.
I've spoken to, I've had a few conversations with a retired RAF fast jet pilot, Tim Davies, who's a squadron leader. A few conversations with him. He's a very, very interesting dude. He knows his stuff. I've talked about the history of aviation a number of times. It is one of the things I'm interested in. And it seems in general, they give out VCs very, very rarely to the RAF. It seems to me, considering some of the feats of gallantry that do get done. I mean, like you talk about us bombing Boulogne and things before this date, September. But we bombed Berlin in late August 40, the first raid over Berlin.
That's right, and of course that's featured in the film.
But that was not the first time that we bombed Germany.
No, it's no, but it's the first time that bombs land on Berlin, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very symbolic. But to the audience, we'd actually bombed German soil as far back as March 1940.
Yeah.
I think there was a VC given out there because that was a pretty horrific loss rate. If I'm not mistaken, I'll double check that. But,
on the VCs, I did have a quick check of that. There have been 26 given to serving RAF who were aircrew, and the majority of those given out on the Second World War. 2 of them in May 1940 during fighting over the Albert Canal in Belgium. But yeah, only during the Battle of Britain, really only 3 were given. 2 in August, but one of them for over Southampton, another one for action over Germany. So technically not really part of that, and the third one over Antwerp in Belgium. So
I think that was Bomber Command.
Yeah, I think number 83 squadron.
So 26 ever.
Yeah.
That seems low, doesn't it? Well, that is low. That is low.
In
the period, one of them has a unique as well. One of them was to a coastal command crew, Lloyd Trigg, and it's the only VC given entirely based on the testimony.
Yeah, that's very, very rare. They were going to give Lawrence of Arabia a VC, but it was based just on his own testimony of what he did in the,
Right.
so he refused to accept it. He said that you can't do that. That's not how this works.
Yeah, well, that's to his credit that
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
You've actually got the anniversary coming up in 4 days' time of the VC that was given to Flight Lieutenant David Lord during the Battle of Arnhem. He's the guy who his Dakota was on fire, but he insisted in continually flying it until all the supplies were dropped out of his plane, and his crew got to bail out, but he went down with the aircraft, just keeping it aloft long enough for everybody to bail out. Yeah, which is it's a shame that most of the supplies didn't even end up in the British hands. But that's a topic for another stream. Is there anything else we want to say about the history? Are there any glaring? Oh, that's a bad. Are there any glaring?
There are one or two, but they're more based on the characters, I would say.
Right. Well, we can cover them when we do the. I'm doing actors and characters next, so I guess we can cover that.
The only thing I would say, and perhaps it's just a completely unfair criticism. It may well be completely unfair criticism, but I always think the film doesn't deal with the span of time well enough, because we are talking about the whole summer, right?
Yeah.
And it does sort of make it clear if you're paying close attention.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing it 2 or 3 times again as a child, where you're not necessarily paying very, very close attention. You're not able to pay that much close attention. Well, I thought this happened over a day or 2 or 3.
Yeah,
Right?
when I was a kid and I watched it, I thought it happened like over a week.
Yeah.
Whereas it's from May to September, really towards the end of September, really. So, yeah, some titles on screen wouldn't have gone amiss, you know.
Yeah, saying 2 weeks later.
Yeah,
yeah,
or just some dates, you know. 1st of September, we could have had 15th of September up for the big day, you know, when you have the big final battle. These sequences here are all shot in Spain, and if you look in the background, you can see the Spanish architecture in the buildings. Yeah, so these are all shot in San Sebastian. So nice work if you can get it. So this gun position is over a harbour in Spain, San Sebastian, looking across the bay. So that is not, in fact, you know, the coast of England in the distance, as is implied in the film. So, and there's our man from Kelly's Heroes. Yeah. I mean, are there any? I was just thinking, is there anything else historically that could have been done better? I'm not sure there is. I mean, it covers a lot. You've got a bit with the Polish pilots in. You've got the Blitz. You've got the.
So there was something about the Polish pilots that did bother me, because the implication was
repeat, please.
Repeat, please.
Repeat, please.
That was a that was a bit economical with the truth. So that wasn't the first Polish squadron. There already was an existing Polish squadron. There was also an existing Czech squadron.
Yeah.
At that point, so 302 was already in place. 310 for the Czechs. Admittedly, they hadn't been in place for that long, but that's still, it's a bit of a disservice to them.
Did they actually state? Did they state or imply that these were the first of those?
Yeah, these were. Oh, your what did I say? Your new boys or something? I can't remember the exact dialogue, but I think the implication was this new lot are in, and then they're all you know, they they don't wait for the translation. They know that they've been inducted. Of course, what's not really made apparent is that they're all seasoned. Well, maybe not all of them, but many of them are seasoned pilots already, and they had been up against the Germans in vastly inferior aircraft. And of course, they were instrumental in developing some of the tactics that would be utilized by the RAF. That, to the credit of the flexibility of the RAF to these new pilots. But just getting nearer and nearer to the enemy aircraft, because they were effectively using the rifle caliber weapons, which were just not doing enough damage. And they would, in some cases, go as close as 50 to 100 yards, which in aircraft terms is just stupendous. You've got a split second to react.
I mean, one of the things that always amazes me is that they only have 15 seconds worth of ammo. That's incredible to me, that they get all this way up there, that they have to do this engagement and this kind of dance around the skies, evading enemy fire, and only having 15 seconds worth of ammunition.
They don't fire. They don't never fire all in one go anyway.
Of course not. No. It was going to be obviously going to be in short bursts.
Yeah. So it's a very quick affair. You find the enemy, you engage. You obviously try to take out the target definitively, more if you can, and then you're back.
But in short bursts, that 15 seconds of ammunition is still going to go pretty quick.
Yeah. You got 3 or 4 shots basically.
Here pilots the account saying it's a quick squirt. You fly by, a squirt here, a squirt there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it feels like nothing. It feels like the whole thing is sort of flawed by how little ammo that they can carry. Because of course, once you're out of ammo, you may as well just fly straight back, right? There's nothing else you can do. You're not going to do a kamikaze. You're of no real help, really. So just leave.
Which is pretty much what they did, wasn't it? That, flying straight back, refuel, rearm, go back up.
Yeah.
I was listening to a account. I think it was a German. He said he flew 7 sorties in one day.
Yeah, that could happen to the British as well. 3 or 4 was pretty typical.
It's a massive credit to the armories as well, and the ground crew.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Very good
point. And it's interesting you touch on that point, both Inside Man and Bo, because it's not just the ammunition, it's the fuel, especially from the Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
People don't take into account just how little time they had over England once they crossed the channel.
Between 15 and 20 minutes, basically.
Less.
Yeah.
So Adolf Galland himself, and I will take him as a primary source, place that as 10 to 12 minutes. Now, that could be, I'm going to give a bit of leeway, that could be with the latter half of the Battle of Britain, once they're escorting the bombers over greater distances to the cities, where they have to fly longer. And that's that major line used later in the film when, of course, Goering is reprimanding the pilots and asks them, what is it you want? What is it you need, sorry? And, of course, the famous line, give me a squadron of Spitfires. So it was actually Galland himself who said that to Goering, one of the few people who could say something like that to him and live. And there's a very important first half of that statement that's missing. And it is, if you want us to fly at those speeds, give me a squadron of Spitfires, which is essentially a huge criticism of his strategy in front of all his men. Like, you don't know what you're doing, mate, basically.
All right. Well, let's talk about the cast and also the characters that they play. Just out of interest, I've just also seen that there was a set of Battle of Britain bubblegum cards that were produced to merchandise the film. I tell you what, a full set of them would be worth a few bob now, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I would have thought
so. I might be wrong, but is this one of the first British films to really push the merchandising angle long before Star Wars?
I don't think there was loads. There was merchandise. There was a hardcover book and a paperback book on the making of the film. That did drop right after. They weren't a massive thing back then. So Dinky Toys produced a pair of die-cast model aircraft based on the film, a Spitfire Mark II and a Junkers. Sucks if you're playing the German then. 1/72 scale were released in special boxes with Battle of Britain logo and photographs of the film included. So, yeah, I mean, they had a few bits. So I wouldn't say it wasn't like you had a full range of everything. I would have been disappointed if I was a kid. I'd be like, well, where's the Heinkel? And I'd want all of them. So
Michael, Messerschmitt,
yeah,
Michael.
that's one of my favourite scenes. That bit. Those kids standing out in the Thames back in the days when people used to go swimming in it, at low tide quite frequently. Yeah. So that's all the merchandise that there was: some dinky toys, bubble gum, and a couple of books. No, I mean, for the time, that's quite a lot, I suppose. So maybe one of the first to produce toys, one of the first feature films to produce diecast toys, possibly. I'd have to do some more digging to find out. But let's look at the cast. The cast for this film, extremely impressive. Some people perhaps a little bit underused, but what's particularly notable about the film is it's one of the first times that a production company went all out to have people cast from the right countries. So this is one of the first big feature films of the time where all the Germans spoke in German and you had subtitles. That was not common back in '69. So you'd often have whoever playing a German role. I mean, look at the cast of Battle of the Bulge. Robert Shaw, who's in this film, is playing a Nazi SS tank commander. So they did go, and I felt as well the German actors that they got, they really looked German as well. They just sort of had that kind of Aryan flyboy confidence, sort of that arrogance about them. I felt they cast them really well, particularly the young German fighter pilots. And these were, they were all sort of quite big actors back in Germany. They either worked in musical comedy. The guy who played Goering was a stand-up comedian. So they all had their own little followings. They might not have been people we knew over here, but they knew what they were doing when they cast those parts. So I was particularly impressed with the German casting. Plus, of course, one of the German commanders would later go on and build a military base under the sea. But that's a whole other movie. So yeah, and then we have our British cast, who's made up of pretty much absolutely everybody who was a bit of a name at the time. Oh, I want to talk about that still, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, quite impressive. Laurence Olivier, of course, Michael Caine, who was a superstar by now because Zulu had come out, and we had Robert Shaw, who was again another a well-known name, and then pretty much every British character actor of note at the time is in this film somewhere. Trevor Howard, big name, of course. Harry Andrews, some people will remember him from Oliver. Ian McShane, I think, was a relatively unknown actor when he did this. Yeah. So he would have been like, oh, you've got to cast this boy. He's up and coming. He's going to be big. You're going to want to buy antiques from him one day. So cast
either that or he was cheap. He was probably very cheap at the time.
He probably was very cheap, and a pretty significant role for him. Kenneth Moore, kind of doing a walk-on, walk-off part, talking about women in trenches and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, Kenneth, not so more.
No, but he played Douglas Bader in the movie about him. So he'd already done several World War II. You've got a very young Edward Fox there. Great scene, which probably you wouldn't get in a film today. Some kid coming out and offering a cigarette. But apparently this was the done thing. When a pilot from the RAF crashed anywhere and was okay, they parachuted down, they were okay. The people, the British citizens, would either come and give him a cigarette or a beer. So it became a bit of a tradition, that you go and get Dad's cigarettes. We've got to have a cigarette for the pilot. So I really liked the fact that they did that, and it was quite accurate. And this account,
that scene was actually based on a real story, by the way.
Yeah, with the boy coming out with the silver box.
Well, that the story is a chap, Raymond Holmes, who it's actually it's quite a famous story. It was captured by Pathé Productions, and it was all wild the crowds around Victoria. So some have accounted that this pilot, Ray Holmes, he actually crashed into this Dornier when his ammo ran out. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but he ended up failing out and landing in the dustbin. And I believe he was offered.
Yeah, no, that's right. I heard that story that he parachuted out and he basically feet first landed in someone's dustbin. That's true. Yeah.
Many years later, there was a excavation, and his aircraft, what left of it was recovered.
Because there's another scene in the film where I think it's a Heinkel crashes down into Victoria Station. It's a very, very effective model workshop. We'll talk about the special effects later, but that did happen as well. That actually there's a really good photograph in that book that you told me to buy of said crashed aircraft in Victoria Station. So yeah, I just must have been like absolutely balmy to be a citizen of London and watching all this stuff unfold in the skies above. You know,
It's funny you say that because my both of my parents they were evacuated, but then came back to London because both were ill-treated by their respective families that they were placed with. So they came back to London, and my mum, who's still with us, and my darling father, who they both have told me many tales of their time during the Blitz and these terrible, terrible things that they saw. Yeah, and you know, it's still very very much prominent in my mum's mind. I mean, she still talks about it, and you know, we do talk about it quite a lot. And, you know, and she explains exactly what things that she witnessed, and you know, all the horror that the East End of London particularly suffered. Yeah, there are some pretty terrible stories that I've been told. Really, really dreadful stories that I've been told. But yeah, both of my parents were eyewitness to that, and yeah, unpleasant. And it's something that we just can't. It's unimaginable to us. It's you know, for people that are maybe not necessarily of our generation, but maybe our children's generation and slightly, you know, sort of the millennial generation, if you like. I don't think it's something that they consider. They, you know, they look at people in a way that's just an elderly person. That's all they are. They are just an elderly person. But you just don't know whether those people, those elderly people, bore witness to some of the terrible things that the Nazis unleashed onto this country. And it is unimaginable to us. All I have is, you know, my mum's personal accounts, my father's personal accounts, you know, when he was still with us, and obviously a plethora of books and documentaries, which are extremely helpful to gain a larger picture. But it's something that I think, you know, we should always remember, particularly what these cities went through: London, Birmingham, Coventry, Liverpool. Just dreadful situations, unimaginable horror, unimaginable daily, you know, terror that they suffered. I just can't. It's unfathomable to me to think that I could be there, even if, you know, as a child, that I would have been in London as a child, and that night after night after night these raids were going on, and I didn't know whether I was going to wake up or whether, you know, I was going to be in a crumpled heap of a building. You know, it must have been truly dreadful, terrifying.
Yeah. My grandparents still had the Anderson shelter in their back garden when I was a kid growing up. And actually, I can remember that probably over half the kids in my street still had Anderson shelters in their garden. Some of them were kind of turned into chicken coops or this kind of thing, you know. But I remember one kid had, you know, kind of turned it into his secret clubhouse or whatever, and it was all very cool with all kinds of extensions and things built on it. But yeah, I mean, it's my grandmother talked about the doodle bugs, as she called them, the V1 that don't feature here. But her husband, my grandfather, he was one of the air raid wardens. So he was, he saw awful things. He was excused from service, military service, because he was a World War I veteran, and he suffered a mustard gas attack. So he had kind of health issues and stuff, but he did his bit in World War II by being an air raid warden, and that was no joke, that job. So yeah, indeed.
If I could say a quick word on Blitz. The numbers are absolutely incredible. Something in the order of 43,000 deaths in London from the Blitz, and it'd be way over 100,000 if you just include all casualties. But 43,000 deaths, I mean, so what? 20 times the number of that died at D-Day. 20 times, and that's just London. That's not including something like Coventry and Birmingham. They bombed like Newcastle and Manchester and Liverpool, all over the place. A lot of people think, oh, it's just London. Also Coventry. No, they bombed all over the place. But just London alone. Yeah, my family, I grew up in the southeast in Essex, really, but my family were from the East End of London before that. And yeah, I remember talking to my grandmother while she was still alive, and she wouldn't talk about it. She was just like, no, it's not to talk about with little kids. And my uncle is still alive now. He had his 80th birthday not too long ago. He was a baby in a crib, and a bomb went off so close that it blew the windows in, and some shattered glass went across him, and he was absolutely fine. But he still tells the story to this day that when Mr. Hitler tried to kill him personally. But no, I mean, 43,000 deaths. That's mad. That's mad. I mean, like, so the Americans lost something in the order of 100,000 in the whole of World War II in Europe. Right. So it's a crazy number, and a lot of the accounts are terrible, because quite often it'll be like a single shelter gets a direct hit, and it's a shambles. Like 50 people are just turned into jam in an instant. It's like the most disgusting things you can imagine, right? And of course they're innocent, completely innocent people, little children and women, and all sorts of nasty stuff. So I think the Brits should be allowed to reminisce about the Blitz spirit and stuff, because it was a very real thing. Anyway, I've made the point.
No, that's absolutely very.
It's funny you mentioned about the Anderson shelters. I mean, they're probably about as much use against the bomb as a woolly hat, to be honest.
Only.
I mean, they're not going to take a direct hit, but I mean, if you're in an Anderson shelter 2 doors down from a house that gets hit, that's when it's going to be helpful.
Or 6 blocks away.
Yeah, ideally.
You mentioned the doodle bug, the V1, but like the V2, that's a cruise missile, right? That's like that's going faster than the speed of sound. So it's actually like some sort of primitive proto intercontinental ballistic missile type thing. Well, not intercontinental, but you get the point. It's a crazy weapon, and they're just dropping them on London, right? They're just crazy, sort of unbelievable. No wonder George Orwell in the late 40s wrote 1984, where all the sorts of things. 1984 is such a reflection of someone that lived through World War II, lived through the Blitz and stuff. A nightmarish vision of the future, essentially.
So I want to mention the chap second left in this photograph has a small role in a scene with Susanna York. He is actually a veteran of the Battle of Britain. He was 20 when he was in his hurricane, I believe, and it caught fire. And his oxygen mask was melted onto his face because the fire was so severe. And hence you can see, he has these facial scars, these facial injuries. And the name of this individual is W.G. Foxley. He was. It was 1944 when he was burned. So he wasn't burned in the Battle of Britain, but he did take part in the Battle of Britain, but sustained his injury much later in the war. Sadly, no longer with us, passed away in 2010. But I thought one of the things that was really good about the film was that they had him in it, and not only did they have him in it, they with his permission, obviously, sort of utilized his narrative to show Susanna York being introduced to somebody who was still serving, still living, but had their face horribly disfigured. And then that became the narrative of Christopher Plummer's character. We never see him, but we know that he got out. We know he lived, but we know from the sequence that his gloves melted to his hands and that he was horribly burned trying to get out of his spit. So she now has already seen what kind of awaits her in her marriage. It's quite disturbing, but very, very effective. And again, you don't need a scene with Susanna York meeting Christopher Plummer. You just need the scene where she's been told that he's been burned, and Kenneth More says that line. Well, it's wonderful what they can do these days, modern technology or whatever. And
it's funny you mentioned about the whole thing between those two. I actually thought that it was the one part of the film, the one element of the film that I disliked the most.
We didn't need as much with them as we got. I would agree with you on that. We probably didn't need the whole bedroom scene and all of that. We could have lost that. I think probably that's more of a, well, we've got to have a bit of a romance story in it. Just, it was there to add something else for people that weren't just interested in the history. So it's fine, it works, but yeah, you could cut a couple of those scenes out and the film would be absolutely fine for it, and that moment would still be just as powerful to, you could just have the stuff with them on the phone arguing about her not getting reposted to be closer to him. That would be all you would need to set up that emotional impact of what happened. But yeah, so I've got to give pundits to Laurence Olivier because he really, really reined it in this film, and beautifully understated performance, because Dowding was not known for theatrics. He was quite a reserved individual, and I think it's to Olivier's credit that he played him as realistically as possible, and really reined him in. I want to show a clip actually, just so hopefully we can get the sound working on it. Let me see. Yeah, so this is right near the beginning of the film.
The Permanent Secretary of State for Air. Sir, I have the honor to refer to the very serious calls which have recently been made upon Fighter Command in an attempt to stem the German invasion of the continent. I hope and believe that our armies may yet be victorious in France and Belgium, but we have to face the possibility that they may be defeated. In this case, I presume that there is no one who will deny that England should fight on, even though the remainder of the continent of Europe is dominated by the Germans. I must therefore request that not one more fighter be sent across the Channel. If the home defense is drained away in desperate attempts to remedy the situation in France, defeat in France will involve the final, complete, and irremediable defeat of this country. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, H.C.T. Dowding.
That's such a clever scene because it tells you everything you need to know at the beginning. And then you go. And by the way, that was his real signature. Apparently, he signed that prop for the movie.
Lance, can I add a bit of context there?
Yeah.
So everyone was, of course, aware of the Hurricanes and the Spitfires, and people are probably aware that he was very much thinking in preserving the Air Force with the slightly newer Spitfires. There's only, I think, 5 months difference between the flight of the Hurricane and the first flight of the Spitfire. But because the Spitfire was notoriously difficult to construct, especially in the beginning, they weren't actually stationed in France. They fought over France, but they weren't actually stationed there. But I think what really isn't brought across there, but when you're aware of it, it suddenly becomes so much more poignant, is you had other aircraft there, particularly the ferry battles, where entire squadrons were wiped out and they would be replaced. So imagine being on that squadron where you know all the previous pilots have gone and you're going to fly in another suicide mission in a woefully unsuited aircraft. So he really saw the writing on the wall in terms of France, and it comes across with such finesse in that letter. It's beautiful, it really is.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's a great
thing. One thing I would say on that is that I think a lot of people give Dowding a fair bit of credit for pushing back on Churchill, because Churchill had said he promised the French, we'll send over all sorts of squadrons to help with the Battle of France. And Dowding said to him, no. I mean, in there, it's very kindly put, I request that we don't do that. Well, that took politically quite a lot of balls, really, to say to Churchill, I know you've promised the French this, but let's not do that. Like, I sort of insist we're just not going to do that. And most people would just, whatever the Prime Minister tells them, especially a wartime Sir Winston, whatever he says, you're just obliged to do. Whereas he had the sort of the nous to say no, or the vision to say that we're going to need them ourselves, every last one of them.
All the more so, Bo, because he already had quite a few enemies in the Air Ministry, and the knives were out almost immediately after the Battle of Britain, as we see with both him and Keith Park.
Yeah, I mean, they do play up the tension between Trevor Howard's character and I forget the name of his character now, and that is played up a bit because he's got several lines where it's either tension between him and Dowling or Mallory is the other one.
Mallory and Keith Park.
Yeah, his big wing. His sort of your big wing. It takes too long to get up. By the time it gets up, they're already heading home.
Ironically, that proved its worth on Battle of Britain Day.
Yeah. Today.
Yep.
So I just further on the cast. I would say I don't really feel like there's any weak links in the cast. I think everybody's pretty good. Some people get to do a bit more than others. One of the things that I realized when I watched the film kind of as an adult, as opposed to when I was a kid, was I couldn't tell who'd been killed. And it wasn't until I watched it on DVD that I realized the scene where Michael Caine's character gets killed is when that Spitfire blows up and the guy comes back and they say they got my number one and the CO. And that's two of the main characters have gone. So that was quite because of course everyone's got masks on. And the director was saying, well, we try to have scenes where because we need the actors that we need them on screen, we need their faces on screen, so we always try to have a scene where someone pulls off their mask to either issue a command or when their thing's on fire or stuff like that. But he said, of course, that's really unrealistic. If they did that, they probably would have blacked out and gone straight into the sea. But yeah, Michael Caine's got a great line. My favorite lines in the film. It's like, I've seen it. It's a field full of with a tent full of dead flies, and that's one of the best lines in the movie. And then you can tell it's him when it attacking now. It's very Michael Caine. But yeah, I really did get confused as to when he got killed. Another thing that the film does well is the in fact, you could make a movie about this subject alone. Is the emotional impact that it has on the women, where they're talking to these young men over the radio for instructions back and forth, and of course they will recognize voices over time and become attached to them and wonder who they are and what they look like, and that's shown with this character who's just a nameless extra effectively, but they do play it in the film really well, that you can see the impact on her when she hears one of the people she's become quite attached to gets killed.
I think that was illustrated really well in A Matter of Life and Death as well.
Yeah,
with David Niven, a beautiful film.
I was listening to one documentary where one of those real women was talking, and she said you hear them as they're going down in flames, screaming because they're being burnt alive before they're dashed to pieces. They're being burnt alive, and you can hear them screaming. And she says, obviously, she says, well, that's really harrowing, or it's like one of the worst things ever, of course. Yeah, and like sort of no shit. Like, oh my god, is there anything worse than that other than actually seeing it? I mean, horrible, harrowing.
Yeah.
I mean, these women, these plotters, did an absolutely remarkable job. I mean, these weren't just, women in uniform that just happened to have some tool that a croupier would have and push little bits and pieces around a map. Which is, I think is, something that, if I'm completely honest, when I first saw this as a kid, I thought that's a bit of a strange old job. But looking into it and what they did, they were part of this incredibly sophisticated line of communication. And they were also very much a pivotal part of what, of the success of the various sorties. I just, hats off to these young women. I mean, these weren't just, like I say, dizzy girls in a uniform, just doing a bit or their bit. These were incredibly intelligent, highly intelligent young women that were part of this very, very important and sophisticated communication line. So I have a lot of admiration for them.
Yeah, no.
Likewise, Inside Man. I'll add to that. I mean, it's the intensity of it as well. It's such a sophisticated system, without the advent of a computer. It is one that requires precision, enormous coordination across the country, with multiple. I mean, when you look at the Dowding system as a whole, it is quite complex. I know it is a refinement of a system. The air defense system goes back to World War One, but it still is quite complex in terms of how much coordination is required. And when you're running multiple sorties a day, especially when your bases are being attacked, it is no simple matter at all. So yes, as a child, they're just pushing these counters around. It looks rather haphazard, but of course it isn't.
Yeah. Very, very good point. Does anybody else want to say anything else about the cast before we move on?
Oh, it's just faultless, isn't it? I mean, just a wonderful. It's the kind of dream cast that any director would wish for. So I think Guy Hamilton really struck gold with this lot.
He did.
Terrific.
The actor on the left here, Miles Hoyle, is still alive, and I did try to track him down. For this stream. I'll tell you who else I tried to track down. You know the little lad who's walking along with Ian McShane, going, "You're not a pilot." That kid, and then because he arrives with him at the church when the church has been destroyed. I tried to find that kid and no luck. He's got a really, really common name as well. It's like, Christopher Miller or something. So it's a pretty common name, and I thought it would have been great to have got him on and talk about the time he was filming this, because I would imagine he'd still be alive. Or one of the kids that was standing in the water, they're ankles. But I couldn't get their names were impossible to find. Let's talk about the visuals. I guess we'll kind of combine this as one. The model work for one thing, and the aerial photography, and the effectiveness of all of that, because they built a vast number of miniatures for the movie. They built a vast number of full-size props, including hurricanes, which when Christopher Plummer gets in the hurricane and it's moving, it's actually got a lawnmower motor in it. So it's a replica with a lawnmower motor, and you could actually gun them around the set at quite a fast pace. And they would have to tell Christopher Plummer not to brake too hard, because if they did, his plane would flip over.
Can I add something to that, Lance?
Yeah, sure.
It became such a problem that people couldn't tell the difference between what they were called Mark Addies, as a sort of an in-joke with Hamish, and they came up with these spoof pilot's notes for the Mark 68. I wish I'd gotten a copy of that, because it's quite hilarious. But it was basically distributed amongst the cast and crew, how to tell the difference.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, they built up a huge number of mock-ups, blew them up, all practical, of course. Here, this would be a series of miniature Stukas, 5 of them shot, and then that plate would be repeated several times, which is why it looks like there's lots of them. And they had remote control ones, which they were bombing around. We actually had a remote control Spitfire on a set that I worked on recently, and the footage of it looks, obviously you need to rescore the sound effects so it's not going like a little racing car, but it looks really good.
I think the miniature work on this is just superb. It's absolutely fantastic. And there are moments when you look at it and you think, hang on a minute, is that real? Is that real? Yeah, it's pretty good. Probably among the best miniature work I think you'll see in any movie, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely for planes. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't even know that they had used miniatures on the film at all, and I was trying to work out, my God. I mean, there's one shot where a Spitfire crashes all the way down onto the beach, and it does. There's somebody jumps out of it. I don't think that's a real person. I think it's a dummy, and it goes all the way down to the beach. It crashes, explodes on the beach, and I think that's a fairly large remote control. I'm guessing, because they obviously wouldn't have had somebody do that. But it looks incredibly real, because you're crashing it onto a real landscape. You're not crashing it onto a miniature set. Just looks unbelievably well. And they had a remote control Stukas. That's correct, for doing the swooping in. They only had one flying Stuka.
It wasn't actually flying. So that Stuka was actually given by the RAF. So you remember I said earlier that they had been very helpful in terms of the aircraft we provided. So that Stuka was obviously, it was a war prize, and it was in an unrestored state. And at that time, it was only one of 2 in the world. It may have even been the only one still around. And the team had tried to restore it, and they actually managed to get the engine running, but they felt that it probably would be better not to fly, given its historical import.
So they probably just used it to shoot the German crew in it.
Well, Well, what they actually did was they got these Percival Proctors, and they attempted to Stuka-rize them, heavily modify them with gull wings and different canopy, and they found they handled absolutely appallingly, as you would imagine. And it's probably a good thing that they didn't attempt to dive on with them, because the wings probably would have snapped off. That would have been a really nasty disaster. I think if I remember correctly, there was a scene where two of the models crash into each other and explode.
Yeah.
That was entirely an accident, but it was so
Yeah.
impressive. They tried to recreate it, and they couldn't.
Yeah, it was unintentional, but it looked really cool. So they put it in the.
Well, that's the sort of thing that would have happened in a panic. You're under attack by superior aircraft. I mean, it happened all the time in Bomber Command.
Another interesting tidbit is that this is actually the old St. Catherine's dock, and it was due for demolition and rejuvenation at the time. This is way before the days of Canary Wharf and all that kind of thing. So they were basically, for the blitz scenes, they were given carte blanche to go in and blow up whatever. And so they set this whole building on fire for real, filmed it falling down, had the real fire tenders in, nearby to make sure things didn't get out of hand. And then the scenes where you see the streets, the English streets with some houses bombed out and stuff, they were real streets. They just went and used ones that were still damaged, that hadn't been repaired, and some streets were being all the people had been moved out. They were going to be sold off and demolished. And so that, again, another one of those kind of happy accidents where you get to shoot all this practical stuff for real. No need to build any sets. There's that kid.
Remember 1968, it's not that long after the real thing.
No.
Right? It's under 30 years. It's remarkable, isn't it? Same sort of thing comes up.
There were still families in those condemned streets that did not want to move. They'd survived the Blitz.
Well,
and I remember reading that the production team had to ensure that when they were carrying out the demolition, they wouldn't affect those houses that were still containing residents.
Right.
Survived the Blitz. Apparently they shoved sandbags everywhere.
Even when I was a kid in the 1980s, I remember seeing a few bombed out places in London.
True. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. That, I mean, I remember them. I mean, I think I probably got about 10 years on you, Bo. But I mean, in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, I remember this vividly. I do remember these huge sort of areas that were just piles of rubble in the middle of a street, and houses either side of them. It's bizarre. And you're right. There still was these areas of the East End of London that were still pretty derelict. That were just awful, just left over from the war.
There's a bit in at the end of Full Metal Jacket. The whole end sort of sequence of Full Metal Jacket. That was near. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it's where I grew up.
It's Beckton Gasworks.
That's it, Beckton. And I remember driving by that when I was a little kid.
Yeah, it was used in quite a few movies, actually. That place.
And I remember being told, I was a really little kid, but I remember being told, "Oh, that's all bombed out from the war still."
Yeah.
So
basically. Well, credit to the art direction. The supervising art director was Maurice Carter on the film. The film was shot by Freddie Young, who, of course, is
oh, goodness me,
director of photography of legendary status. They've got a cabinet dedicated to him at Pinewood. I'm sure you've seen it. With all his awards in it.
Yeah.
Terence Clegg was one of the first ADs. There were several first ADs on the show because, of course, there were several units. But Terence Clegg would go on to have a number of substantial credits as a producer later on in film and television. and work on a whole number of shows. And he was an executive producer on Cry Freedom, Out of Africa, so various other things, including the remake of the Jackal. Incidentally, the Day of the Jackal miniseries should be coming out soon. My friend Jason Fleming's got a part in that, and apparently it's very good. The script was very good, so I'm curious to see the new take on it. So I'm big fan of the original movie with Edward Fox. Such a good film.
It's a great movie. Great movie.
Yeah,
terrific.
Special effects department, just to give them their due. A lot of people worked on it uncredited, so you got a huge list of people here.
Can I just ask you just briefly, who was the miniature effects supervisor and the actual special effects supervisor?
Yeah,
I've got that written down somewhere. Just give me a second, I can get that for you.
I mean, Ray Capel, Cliff Richardson, and Glenn Robinson and Wally Vivers were
Cliff Richardson.
Not Cliff Richardson. Yeah. No relation to Cliff Richard.
No. I think he did Lawrence of Arabia, didn't he, Cliff Richardson?
Yes, he did. He did and he did Day of the Jackal and Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, he did. Cliff Richardson did that famous, that amazing train explosion. The train derailment in Lawrence of Arabia. Wonderful special effects.
So he's your the head of model aircraft design and construction was a guy called John Siddle.
Right.
So he was in charge of building the miniatures. You have Mick Charles, Jack Morton, and Alan Quested did the optical effects. And then got a few other people. Roger Turner was an assistant modeler, uncredited.
John Siddle, that's it.
Yeah.
By the way, at some point when the film was running out of money, I think they were all told that your services are no longer needed, and I think they just pioneered various techniques. Fiberglass molds and things like that, but brand new techniques, pioneering. And at some point they were told, everything's back on. I don't know how many months later. And if they hadn't come up with these techniques, it probably would never have happened.
Yeah.
But just imagine being told that you work your socks off to come up with accuracy and this miniature explosive capability in these models, and then you're told, no, if your services are now surplus to requirements.
Well,
it's such a shame. It's such a regular kind of occurrence. It happens so frequently. Such a shame.
Unlike the miniatures work in the Battle of the Bulge and Doctor Who Robot, the miniatures work in this film. I mean, it's I watched the film again today. It still looks fantastic. There's a couple of optical shots that are a bit ropey, but overall,
if you were a kid in 1969, this would have been absolutely
would have blown your mind.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I'll talk about what the critics said a little bit, but I just want to jump on this. So my understanding in the film, and again, it's not always specific where we are, but that this is RAF command in Uxbridge. That's the impression I'm given, because this is where Winston Churchill comes and visits, etc. Now, you can, by appointment, I believe, go and visit this place. It still exists. It's not like an open everyday museum, but it is a museum, and if you contact people, possibly through a dead letterbox, I'm not sure of the entire procedure, but you can go. Has anyone been?
I haven't been there personally, but I think they have enactors and what have you.
There are some special days. I feel like we should organise a channel outing to go and see this place, because it's still there, and you never know when these places are going to disappear because of lack of funding or whatever. Be even better if we could play some sort of massive war game on that map, wouldn't it? That'd be good. But
that'd be awesome.
So at the time, like I said, when the film came out, it was in that sort of anti-war era. Vietnam was in full throw. One person who was particularly negative in their review was Roger Ebert from Siskel and Ebert, who wrote, "The aerial scenes are allowed to run forever and repeat themselves shamelessly until we're sure that we've seen that same hindquartal dive into the sea 3 times already. And the special effects aren't all that good for a movie that cost 12 million quid. Well, a couple of the plate shots, sure, are iffy. But I bet when he wrote that, he didn't even know any miniatures were used. I bet he didn't even know any remote control.
In fairness, I think that's because a lot of the details are lost on the layman.
Yeah.
Also, Roger
it's meaningless.
Ebert is a complete scumbag.
Yeah.
Well, we forgot to say that, of course. Do you want to
By the way,
elaborate?
Lance, there was tremendous controversy with the soundtrack, and is it possible that also affected the initial reception and criticism?
Funnily enough, I did mean to mention that. So the original soundtrack, and on the version I've got, you can watch the film with one soundtrack or the other. Because Ron Goodwin was not the original composer. The original composer, I forget his name now.
William Walton.
Thank you, William Walton, who was a good friend of Laurence Olivier. And I don't know what the exact conflict was that led to Walton being fired and Ron Goodwin.
I don't think he wasn't. It wasn't. He had other commitments, as far as I know.
Right.
He himself was. I don't think he was a young man at that point. He had delegated to various assistants, but he had other commitments. He was very much by the book.
Right.
And for whatever reason, they got into some sort of contractual entanglement because they had a limited amount of time. Time is money, and they didn't want things to go pear-shaped.
Yeah, because I mean, Laurence Olivier threatened to walk off the picture at one point, and was going to not do any publicity for it, all this kind of thing. So there was definitely a lot of smoothing of ruffled feathers that went on behind the scenes. And now, of course, you can watch the film just with the original composer and not with the meshing of the two.
I'm so pleased that you both mentioned the soundtrack, because I have to just say that perhaps my favourite sequence is when we lose the audio and we just get the score over the picture.
They call it the
that's Battle of the Air. That's William Walton.
Yeah.
My goodness me! It just, I mean, it gave me goosebumps. It really gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, it's a very effective scene, and the director called it the battle ballet sequence. And basically, that whole sequence was, they needed to show one more fight, so it was like, right, let's find every piece of footage that we haven't used yet, because they had loads. They shot loads of film and just cobbled it all together into that sequence. And that became your kind of final battle montage. But yeah, like I said, it's got some incredibly effective scenes when the aircraft blow up, when they blew up the miniature models. I mean, I was like, when I was young, I was like, isn't that a real aircraft blowing up?
Yeah.
So it's only the optical effects that look a bit dated now, but all the miniature stuff is just fantastic. Well, before we wrap up, so basically, for anyone listening, the critics were wrong, and it was a good film. You should watch it.
I mean, just to build on that, it's one of those things where, like Zulu, they won't put it on TV much anymore.
No.
Just because it shows Britain winning, or it shows like white dudes being really super brave and stuff. So they don't show it anymore. It's exactly the reason why someone like Roger Ebert hated it or didn't like it, or like a Bridge Too Far.
But this film will be remembered long after they have disappeared from memory.
Yeah.
Certainly like to hope so. By the way, these bombs that are being dropped are real props. They were made out of concrete. So when they filmed them dropping those payloads, they had to do it over the sea. So somewhere in the Spanish Sea, there's a whole load of unexploded concrete munitions.
You just reminded me of something, Lance. So remember they had to borrow these casas from the Spanish airport.
Yeah.
And at that time, rather inconveniently, there was this big NATO exercise, and the Spanish needed their casters, they needed their bombers for this, and there was all this toing and froing, and they needed the aircraft with their Luftwaffe colours on. So compromise was reached that they could have the aircraft back for this exercise, but they were flying in their Luftwaffe colours.
Yeah. So that would have been hugely entertaining for the NATO people involved.
Oh, that must have caused a few hot collars.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a good scene where somebody comes back from a mission and they puke up. It's towards the end, and everybody looks like they're completely shattered. And the strain of doing 5-6 missions a day, you're between 20, 21 years of age. I can't even imagine it really. This footage.
Again, a quick account from real people, more than one pilot, say their overriding memories of that summer is being ridiculously tired.
Yeah.
Just being ridiculously tired. And they say they're in their prime. Yeah, they're in their early 20s. And, well, yeah.
But how they age, though. There's a very famous photograph of Brian Lane, one of the pilots of that era. Sadly, would later lose his life after the Battle of Britain. And you look at him from a few months earlier, and there's this haunting picture of him at the height of the battle, and he looks like he's aged 10, 15 years. He's got that sunken look, that 1,000-yard stare. It's awful.
Yeah, can imagine. Yeah, so out of 10, I'm gonna be giving this film a 9. For me, it's not a perfect movie. I think as people mentioned earlier, I think the narrative of the expansion of time could have been covered a little bit better with some titles, maybe a few little hints here and there. Doesn't detract from the film. It just makes it harder for you to grasp some of the historical minutiae. But overall, I've got few complaints. I love this shot, incidentally, with the matte painting of the whole German, invasion fleet waiting, and then you cut to this shot later, and they've all gone. It's all empty, which was again very effective. That's all you need to let you know the invasion ain't happening. Just this picture and then the other one. So 9 out of 10 from me. History Bro, what's your?
Yeah, I give it a 9.5 or a 10. We often talk about how you calibrate something. Are you a person that there's no 10 ever, or there's one film in the whole world that you would give a 10 and everything else is off of that, or whether you liberally hand out 10s all over the place? I'm one of those people that would hand out 10s fairly liberally, and so this for me is a 9.5 or a 10. Couple of tiny things I feel out of order for even mentioning to criticize. So I love it. I think it's brilliant. It's of its time, of course. So I don't take anything away from it, so for it being a little bit dated here and there. So I'll give it a 9.5. Yeah, or a 10. 9.5, 10.
Inside Man.
It's got to be a 9. I mean, I actually think it's an hour too short. I would have loved an extra hour of this movie. So it's so for me, it's a film too short rather than a bridge too far. I genuinely think that an extra hour would have given me an easy way of putting a 10 on this. But a couple of tiny little niggles, but they're very, very minor.
Blippedy
Blop. I do
Blop.
love it.
Well, I'm obviously extremely biased, so I'm going to be giving it a 10. I'm not going to say it doesn't have certain flaws, especially from historical or there's nitpicking aspects. But I look at it for what it is. It is a labor of love. It is a true testament to the few. And when I look at what went into this film, it's such a far cry from filmmaking today. It is the dedication. All those people who never got any credit, but they didn't whinge and moan about it because they felt they were doing their duty. You look at the RAF's participation in it. You look at the technical advisors from both sides. Former RAF personnel, Douglas father was there. Incidentally, he was the one who would insist on pushing Dowding in the wheelchair. There's a photograph of him doing that as well, and various others as well. Ginger Lacey was there. I think he reprimanded one of the younger actors who insisted on showing his face when he should have had a mask on. And I read it somewhere. He said to him, "Look, mate, you see that extra over there? We pay him £25 a day instead of your 250. We can easily get him to take your place if you don't want to wear the mask." And it was just, I don't know how to put it into words, but there's that certain feeling that it's from a different era. And I don't just mean from the 1960s, I mean that generation that were involved with the Battle of Britain. You can feel their signature all over it. And for me, that just gives it that full thing.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Barter, and the character also, Robert Shaw's character, Skipper. So
he's based on a South African guy, isn't he?
He's right. He's supposed to be based on a South African called Sailor Malin. Unfortunately, the family of Sailor Malin were very, very upset with his portrayal because he was nothing like that. He was a very softly spoken, very amiable, very gentle guy. And if anything, Skipper's portrayal is much closer to Douglas Fader, that sort of rubs people the wrong way. Rather blunt, to the point. I mean, very honest. He will say what he thinks to your face, but definitely can be quite what's the word? Brisk.
Yeah.
Definitely a tour de force, a powerful character, and that's not what Sailor Malin was. He was an extremely capable pilot, a very, very proficient pilot, but he wasn't a overpowering person at all. Still give it a 10 though.
Absolutely. Inside Man, this is your dad doing a cameo, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty high score. That's almost like 37.5 out of 40. So yeah, one of the highest scores yet. It is a fantastic film. We've had a few other things that have covered this same narrative. By the way, this street that doubled for Berlin, again, this is San Sebastian in Spain. When I heard that, I was proper shocked. I really thought this was either a purposely constructed set on a backlot, or they'd gone somewhere, more German, shall we say? But no,
magic of the movies.
Yeah,
that's another testament to the dedication of the production team. Those working on set, because they went out their way to get period correct German newspapers, things like that. It is attention to detail that most people are not going to spot.
No, indeed. Really, it's been great researching this, reading up on the books and so forth. Just finding out things like they used cooking oil in the engines of the planes to produce the white plumes of smoke when planes have been hit, and then they used actual canisters, effects canisters, to pop the black smoke. Stuff like that. It's all been pretty nuts, really. And as you say, you're not likely to get a film like this made now. We had a TV show. I don't know if you guys remember it. A couple of my friends were in it, actually, and it was called A Piece of Cake.
Yeah.
So
I've got it all, actually.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it on DVD. And I sort of, I think it was one of those shows that kind of came out 8 o'clock on a Sunday. It was like ITV. 8 o'clock on a Sunday, sort of, hot on the heels of We'll Meet Again, came out a couple of years after We'll Meet Again, which actually was I've just rewatched that. It's a fairly decent show, script-wise at least. It just looks terribly dated because of the cameras that they used. But Piece of Cake, I watched that. I was kind of like, yeah, this it felt a bit naff, if I was honest. Didn't think it was that good. So if you're going to watch something about the Battle of Britain, watch the film The Battle of Britain. That's where it's at. In a nutshell. Right, so that's it from us on the Battle of Britain. Gone slightly over the usual time of 2 hours. So I'll do a quick round robin, but just to remind people what I've got coming up. So Nielsen Ratings, one of my regular shows every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. This Tuesday, because it's the anniversary of Operation Market Garden, in particular, we're going to be looking at films around that topic or TV shows. I dare say I might show a couple of clips of my Bridge Too Far mega cut again, and before it gets taken off air. Still haven't managed to get that up online anywhere yet. And then on Wednesday, I have an industry interview with Janelle Richards, who's made a really interesting web TV series, which another friend of mine, Darren, is in. So I think I've got a cast member as well as a producer coming on. I think the show's called Shining Light or something like that. But it's to do with clash of culture and racism and all kinds of stuff. So very hot topic. Next Sunday, of course, thank you, Ryan, for reminding me, we are going to be diving into The Shield finally. So first 2 episodes next week. I've had a couple of people who've watched it on my recommendation. Darth Plato binged 4 seasons in about a week. So that's how good it was. Bo, if you've never watched it, I can guarantee you that it's far less gay than Spartacus and much more realistic. But if you ever watch an American cop show, watch that one. We're going to be doing the first 2 episodes of that next week. And then on the 25th of September, I've got my big interview of the month with Gail Ann Hurd, producer of Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens, and so on. She is still, of course, it's all subject to availability because she is a very busy woman, but so far, so good. She is coming on the 25th of September at 6 p.m. UK time. I only have her for an hour. So I'll do my best to ask questions from the chat, but I have had to submit all my questions in advance. So whether we'll get to them or not, I don't know. But she's coming on 6 o'clock, 25th of September. So that's going to be an absolutely stonking interview. Can't wait. History Bro, what do you have coming up? I think your links are already in the blurb below. Lotus Eaters and so on.
Right, yeah, thanks. So yeah, on Lotus Eaters, I've got my own quote unquote show called Epochs, and now I'm going through the decline and fall of the Roman Republic. We talked all about over many weeks, talked about Cato the Younger and Crassus and Pompey and Caesar. This week I took a 1 week hiatus out for an interview I did with Tom Rousell, aka Survive the Jive, if you know him, sort of an ancient historian, medievalist, Anglo-Saxonist. And we're talking all about the very earliest Britons, the people from the earliest age, the pre-Stonehenge people, through to the builders of Stonehenge, through to the Celts of the Iron Age forts, and all that sort of thing. So that's on the Lotus Eaters, and I'm also on the daily podcast of Lotus Eaters a couple of times a week. And then on my channel, my own channel, History Bro, last thing I posted up there was an interview I did with Godfrey Bloom, who's an ex-MEP. He was an ex-UKIP MEP. An older chap, and he's brilliant. He's a fascinating person. We talked all about the origins of World War One, whether Britain should have got involved in World War One. Spoiler alert: we both agree that we shouldn't have done. It was a catastrophe from every possible angle.
I'm sure my grandfather would agree with you.
Right, yeah. And you can also find me on Twitter just as Bodade, where I'm extremely acerbic and rude to leftists and globalists on a daily basis. Check that
out. And just to remind everybody watching, we don't do politics on this channel.
Sorry, I said too much.
But no, you haven't. But I also don't censor my guests on whether I believe or don't believe with my guest politics is irrelevant to me. It's all about whether my guests have got something interesting to say on the topic that I'm talking about. And if they have knowledge in that area and I think they have value, then everyone is welcome, regardless of, what you think about things so in the world today, shall we say. And in that context, Bo is a much treasured guest. So, Inside Man, do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, obviously, I'm going to be joining you on Tuesday for the Nielsen rating. So, looking forward to doing anything concerned with Bridge Too Far.
I'll probably talk about Theirs Is the Glory as well, I think. And
yes.
We'll do Band of Brothers a little bit, mention the episode they did, and anything else we can think of that's vaguely Arnhem related.
Yeah. And then thanks to you. I mean, you've introduced me to The Shield, so I'm joining you next Sunday for a breakdown of episodes 1 and 2 of The Shield, and I have watched them.
It's good. It's good, right?
It's far better than I was expecting. If I'm completely honest with you, it's above and beyond what I was expecting. I thought it's very, very good. Yeah.
And listen, it only gets better. It's kind of finding its feet in season 1, but it finds its feet pretty fucking quickly. I mean, that scene where he suddenly turns around and shoots that guy, and you know what I'm talking about.
My God!
It's just like you suddenly go, "Hang on, what just happened?"
Yeah. That's how you end an episode.
Yeah, I mean, every episode is like, "Oh my God, I got to watch the next one." That's what you want. That's what you want from a show. But Inside Man did ultimately enjoy Spartacus History Bro. Probably.
Yeah, I did surprisingly. I believe it or not, I think it was up until episode 4. I just thought it was going nowhere fast, and then all of a sudden we got to episode 5 and 6, and it started to pick up, and I really started to enjoy it. I really enjoyed it.
The last two are pretty good.
Last 2 were very good. Yeah.
So Blippedy, do you have anything you want to plug at all, mate? I know you're fairly incognito, so probably not.
Well, I do have 2 channels that I potentially plug. I have a gaming channel, and I also I don't want to open a can of worms here, but I do have a Tolkien-based channel as well, called Tolkiendom, and I've tackled.
Is that on? Is that on YouTube?
It's on YouTube. Oh yes, it's on YouTube. I've tackled a very critical approach to season 1 of Rings of Power, and my approach is comparing the show with how it's supposed to tackle its own source material that it has full access to. And I've yet to do season 2. I'm not just putting it off, everybody. I have a number of personal projects that I do consider a bit more important, but I will get round to them at some point.
I was going to say, good luck. I've just seen in the news there's been another attempted assassination of Trump.
Yeah, I just saw something on Twitter about that. I don't know, but I don't know what it actually is.
No, I've just I don't know the full. I've just seen it's just come up on my news feed.
Can you verify that, or is that some sort of
some kind of, I don't know. It's on BBC, so
good God.
Live from Washington. Lots of people running around with guns and police cars everywhere. So something's happened.
I literally just a few minutes ago on Twitter, someone said second attempt on Trump, but I don't know any details.
So everybody knows, Bo is here with us live, so he's
and my alibi's locked in.
Yeah, not responsible.
No, I love the Donald.
Yeah, well, there you go.
No, actually, I don't. But anyway, it wasn't me.
Politics.
Whatever happened, it wasn't me. Yeah, no politics. Yeah. Sorry, Lance. No politics.
That's all right. Difficult when you're talking about World War II, but you know.
Right.
Anyway, well, look, thanks to my guest for coming on. Thanks to Johnny Hansler for popping on briefly to just give his dad a shout out, which I was more than happy to facilitate. Lots of people, if you go onto IMDb and look at any film pre-1975 or even some later, there's no end of uncredited credits for people working on movies. And this is back in the day when, you know, Big credit, scrolling titles at the end, effects department, 50 names. Not a thing in the 1970s. You had to fight to get your credit in a film, front or back of the movie.
By the way, can I just quickly add something, guys, in terms of that? So the B-25, the psychedelic monster, so that pioneered so many aerial combat filming techniques to the extent that B-25s were then being sought the world over. And I believe one was used in Memphis Belle, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't the same one, but because they had cameras where all the machine guns were.
Yeah.
So,
well, the psychedelic monster had much more than that. It had, I think, $75,000 then in all this high-tech equipment. So the dorsal turret was replaced with this very elaborate studio station with multiple TV screens so that they could keep track of all the cameras in real time. Then, in 1968.
Right.
So another reason why Battle of Britain gets 10.
There you go. It pioneered things in more ways than one. Well, thanks for everybody on the chat for popping in. We had quite a nice audience throughout, so that's always good. Don't forget to check out the other content. I had one of the cast members from Star Trek Wrath of Khan on the channel the other day, Laura Banks, one of Khan's ladies. She was a fantastic guest. If you haven't seen that interview, it was a ton of fun. Do check it out. But yeah, that's it from us. We'll be back again real soon. And also don't forget, History Bro and I will be doing a special on the film JFK on the 22nd of November. We just picked that date at random. So we'll be doing a special later on in 2 months' time. Yeah. But there'll be more historical content on the way because, I do like my history. Until then, we'll speak to you all again real soon.